They say life is what you make it. So what happens if you actually try? What if you actually tried to get your mind right? What if you actually tried to live the high life? What if you happen to die cause life is finite? What if you actually tried to live your best day ever? What if you actually tried to get your mind right? What if you actually tried to live the high life? What if you happen to die cause life is finite? What if you actually tried to live your best day ever? What if you actually grind out when the time's right? What if you actually blinded by your hindsight? What if you actually find out what defines life? What if you actually tried to live your best day ever? I'm getting 1% better every day. I'm getting 1% better every way. I'm waking up every day to a sunny day. No matter what the weather say, life is like a record, so just let it play.
Alrighty, welcome back everybody. This is episode 19 of Best Day Ever, and today we're going to be talking all about firearms accuracy, and in particular we're going to be talking about the modifications and various components of your rifle and how you can modify those things on your rifle to be a more accurate shooter. And the reason why we're going to be talking about that today is, as some of you may know, I am both a big game hunter and an upland bird hunter. So I've been hunting with my grandfather for, I don't know, I guess about 20 years now, 22 years. So I was first holding a shotgun when I was maybe 6 years old. I still remember the lake. It was called Dead Lake in Zone 50 near Algonquin Park. And that was when I first shot a 12 gauge, 410, 22, things like that, you know, shooting at some logs or some wood in the lake, and very fond memories there. And it's been a part of my company's, or excuse me, it's been a part of my family's heritage for as long as my family can remember. My grandfather has been hunting with his father, and so on for generations now. And my great grandfather was actually working for the MNR, so the Ministry of Natural Resources, as a game warden. So this stuff is just baked in to our DNA at this point, and part of that is the understanding of, like, why do we hunt, right? And there's been a lot of discussion here in Canada very recently about, like, firearms, right? What are these things for? Should we be able to have them? Are they tools or are they weapons of mass destruction, essentially? For my family, this has always been about sustenance. In the past, they were hunting for food, right? They were hunting deer, rabbits, partridge, things like that to live off of. And those skills and sort of the lessons learned in doing that were transferred to me. And one of the big things about hunting for me has always been the consideration of the ethics, right? Because when you're hunting, there's a lot of things going on. There's a lot of pressure mentally and emotionally if you're going to actually pull the trigger on an animal that you regard as you know, another living being, right? There's a massive amount of respect for these animals as we're hunting. That's been ingrained in my family and all the guys that I hunt with. And I think that's another misconception about hunters too. Like, they're all just like bloodlusting killers. That's not the case, right? If you shoot a moose or something majestic like that, you should know that, you know, in a group of, I hunt with about 10 to 15 guys, depending on the year. These guys are seasoned hunters, all ranging between kind of 30 to 75, 80 years old. If you shoot a moose, you will see every single one of those guys break down in tears, right? It's a beautiful moment. It's kind of a sad moment. But one of the things that can happen, and it doesn't get discussed a lot, is when you're out there, it's cold, right? You know, if it's morning time and you've just got up, maybe 4, 5, 6 in the morning, you're out there in the cold, you're cresting mountains, you're walking through the bush. There's a lot of stuff going on. The cold will affect your responses. You know, if it's early, you're just kind of waking up, you're a bit groggy, you've got some questionable decision making. You've then got to deal with the emotions of pulling the actual trigger on a majestic animal like a moose or a deer or something like that. And then you've got your environmental factors like rain, snow, sleet, fog, and the trees and other obstructions in your way. And what can happen is, with all of those combined factors, there's room for margins of error. And one of the worst things that can happen if you're out hunting is that you decide, you take and make the decision to pull the trigger on an animal and you're not accurate, right? You hit the animal in some way that doesn't actually kill it in a way, or a lethal shot where the animal goes down in front of you so that you can harvest it. Okay, missing an animal, that's fine. That's part of hunting. Pulling the trigger, hitting an animal, and then not being able to recover and harvest that animal is one of the saddest and honestly most disgusting things that can happen to you, because you understand that you've probably caused this animal to die, and you will not have the benefit of the sustenance and the meat and everything after that. So I'm a firm believer that hunting ethically, in terms of making sure that you're making clean and accurate shots that put your animals down immediately, I think that is a requirement. I don't think that's optional. I think everybody should strive to get to that point 100% of the time. So this discussion is sort of framed from that perspective, because I think there's also another misconception. Oh, we're out shooting. This is cool. It's fun. We're going to shoot good groups. We're going to shoot as far as we possibly can. We're going to try these crazy shots. And there's some bragging rights there maybe for your buddies at the range. But what this actually boils down to is the utility, right? Why are we doing this, right? This isn't just sport. There is a sporting element to it, but this is not just about sport, right? This is about ethics, and this is about being responsible steward, right? Read the Bible. I'm not a Bible guy, but one of the great things in there is like, hey, you guys are stewards of this thing. And I believe that part of that means being ethical and responsible when you're out hunting. So I think that's a great place to frame this discussion. It is also a jumping off point. I could have we only have 1 hour for these shows. We're down to 15 minutes already. So I could have spent 1 hour on each of the components we're about to talk about, and there's several. And so this is a point to jump off of as a springboard. I'm not going to tell you right now that this is the conclusive article or discussion on firearms accuracy. Okay, I want to start with that. But before we jump into what makes a firearm more accurate, Matt, could you tell me, have you had any experiences with firearms in the past? Is this in your family as well?
Not to the extent that you've had. So, yeah, not to the extent you've had.
I understand you come from a farm.
Yes.
So probably guns to you, right? Where it's always kind of like the farm shotgun or the family, 22 or something like that. And that's how I think a lot of people grow up, right? Is we grow up, if you're from Canada, particularly Northern Canada, like I'm certain you've seen guns, right? And maybe you've handled them, maybe you've even shot some. And what I think a lot of people picture when they picture a gun is kind of that, that old wooden stock rifle that has, that scope that's maybe a fixed power, maybe it's like a 3 to 10, and it's just kind of the thing that was always around the house, right? Or that shotgun that's kind of beat up and, kind of rusty, but it's always been there. Maybe it was your grandfather's. And that's okay. And I don't want to discourage anybody that is working on one of those platforms, but if you are interested in getting better, these are going to be some of the things that we want to focus on. So one of the first things I wanted to share with you guys when we're talking about getting more accuracy with the rifle is going to be the scope itself. So I'm going to pull up a screen share here and show you guys the article on our Substack. By the way, if you're not subscribed, you should get subscribed, because you will actually get emailed to you a copy of each one of our articles that have extensive notes. We're not going to be able to cover everything that I wrote in this discussion today, because I wrote out about 2,600 words on this, and it doesn't even scratch the surface. So get subscribed, read these full articles and everything that's covered in them. But to get our discussion kicked off, I want to talk to you about optics. Optics are one of the more important things on your rifle, because it's literally what you see your target through, okay? And there's a massive difference in a cheap optic and a great optic, okay? And you notice I actually referenced cheap there. I'm talking about price. Price is not always the best indication of quality, but when it comes to optics, honestly, it really is. The more you go up in price range, you will certainly notice that you can get very, 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 very different quality glass. So I want to draw your attention here to an image. While I was hunting this past week, I can actually click on this. This is amazing. While I was hunting last week, I took a few images of one of my friend's precision rifles, and I want to talk about a few different things that are going on here. So when you look at this scope, there's a few different things happening. First of all, it's a great piece of glass, okay, which means it's laser etched reticles onto the glass. And that's really important because what ends up happening if people try and use any other form of reticle is you lose clarity from the middle of the scope out to the far ends of the scope in your actual field of view. Okay, so get the glass etch scopes. They're more money, but they're very well worth it. And I actually have links there for you guys to some of the brands that I would most recommend. So I would recommend looking at scopes from Burris Optics, Leopold, Vortex Optics. These guys have unbelievably high they have unbelievably high requirements for great workmanship. Okay, so if you get bad workmanship with these guys, they all have incredible warranties. And Vortex, I believe, is actually a lifetime warranty. They will guarantee all of their stuff for life. You want to deal with these reputable companies because poor workmanship will end up in a lack of durability and longevity. And that is literally the worst thing if you're trying to get a shot off. So a couple things going on here with this scope. You can see, first of all, that it's in MRAD. And for those of you that aren't really familiar with scopes, we're not going to do this whole deep dive because this is a whole other discussion. But MRAD is going to be a lot less complicated for you than MOA. Okay, so MOA is minutes of angle, and this is milliradians. The reason why MRAD is better or more usable is it's in, I don't even know how to say it. It's in tenths. Okay, so like we're essentially counting meters, and centimeters are all in hundreds, right? So we can break these into denominations of 10. So any changes that you need to make to your shot for corrections, we can use in scales of 1/10 instead of having to do math or fractions, right? There's nothing worse than saying, yeah, we need 3 inches and 7/8 of correction. And say, what the fuck does that mean? Let's just count in tenths. It's way simpler. And when you're under pressure and when your hands are cold and when you're not thinking right and when you're, your heart's racing and stuff like that, you're dealing with terrain, you don't want to be thinking in fractions. No, it's not going to help you. So choose a scope that is in MRAD. It's much simpler. And then bonus points too. If you do have somebody spotting for you, or if you're going to be using a spotting scope, make sure that that scope is also in MRAD. There's nothing worse than having a spotter with an MOA scope and then you using an MRAD scope. Make sure all your gear is the same. The other thing I want to point your attention to is this scope is actually relatively cheap. And some of you are about to puke when I say the cost and say it's cheap, but this scope's about $1,700. Okay. And there are scopes, and I've got lots of links there for you. Say you go crazy. Say you buy like one of the best scopes for like an average consumer out there, being the Vortex. I've linked to it there, but like there's the Vortex Razor Gen 2, whatever, and it's like $4,000. If you mount a beautiful scope that has the most clear glass in the world, everything's laser etched, it's got the highest quality of workmanship, and then you put it on a shitty scope ring, you have literally just defeated the entire purpose of having an accurate and high quality scope. And one of the reasons for that is because when you shoot a firearm, particularly a rifle that has these long barrels, most of these rifles are going to have like a 26-inch, 29-inch barrel, something like that. And when you shoot it, if you actually slow down the video and look at a video played in slow motion, often you'll see that the barrel itself actually does a little whip. Okay, so this is called barrel whip. And there's also barrel harmonics. Okay, so essentially the force and vibration and all of that comes from a projectile having a small explosion and then flying out the end of the barrel. These things are following Newton's laws of physics, right? So there's going to be a reaction that's equal and opposite to that explosion coming back into the gun. Now, most of that is transferred in a straight line back to you, the shooter, and that's where people describe that kick in their rifle, right? But what's also happening is you get that vibration and that whip into your scope via the action here. And so if you have a scope ring that has a single screw on each side, you're setting yourself at a massive disadvantage. Okay. The other thing, so this one has 3, which is extreme. These scope rings here are about $300. So I understand if you want to go a little bit cheaper, there's ones that have 2 screws on each side for about $200. Finally, you'll notice there's a level on this scope. The reason for this is because at greater distances or in circumstances where you're shooting either uphill or downhill, you will have a tendency to cant your rifle. Okay, so if you're shooting down a hill, it's not obvious. It's not typically obvious to the naked eye whether or not your rifle is actually level. And if you do that, you'll essentially change the angle at which you're looking through your scope, which changes the angle of your barrel, which changes the angle of the trajectory of your bullet, okay, which can cause you to miss. And again, the reason why we don't want to miss is because we don't want to harm an animal and not harvest it. We want to be successful with our shots. So when you're shooting, especially at long distances, and I'm talking outside of maybe 200-300 meters, 1 to 200 meters, almost nothing matters if we're using a high velocity round. But when we start shooting further than that, you absolutely need to care about the level of your rifle and the cant of it. So having a level mounted right on the scope is a great tool for that. You can look right up over your scope. You've still got both your eyes open. It's right in your field of view. You can see kind of the whole situation in front of you and take into consideration everything in the direction and speed that your animal's moving at, and then make a great shot that comes from a level barrel. So those are some of the things I want to talk about the scope. One last thing that is very important, any good scope that you're going to be looking at these days will have what's called zero stops. So you can see here that if you turn this scope turret to the left, it's going to essentially adjust the reticle view up for you. So what's going to end up happening here is the further the distances that you're shooting out to, the more your bullet's going to drop, right? And the way we want to adjust for that, there's two ways. You can either do a holdover where you're literally adjusting the bore of your rifle and looking up higher through the scope and using the reticle to figure out your drop. You could do that, or much better than that for most circumstances is you can dial up your turret and change where the reticle actually is inside the scope so that you're still aiming for the crosshair through your scope. Okay, Matt, is that well enough communicated? Like you can either like twist the gun up and look higher, or adjust it on your scope so that it appears to be centered in the scope even though you have looked higher. I hope I communicated that well enough. But the purpose of a zero stop is to then, after you've made that shot, say at 400 meters, you know exactly, well, you don't even need to know, you will dial it back to your zero position. Okay, and there's a common sort of statement that was made to me when I'm using somebody else's gun, right? And if you're going to use somebody else's gun and you're shooting at distance, you often are changing elevation and windage, which is that left dial here. And so when you're shooting, often the guys will say, please be kind and rewind, right? This is a throwback to our rental movie days when you're renting VHSs at the Blockbuster or Rogers. So, you know, when we rewind, well, where is the zero point, right? If your scope doesn't have a zero stop on it, it's possible you will over rotate. And one of the things is, so I recently, and if you're listening to this and you're actually pretty adequate with firearms, you're going to shit yourself right now. As kind of a joke, not a hunting scenario, but as a joke, last week I personally shot 350 meters with a 22, which is literally next to impossible. And the way we were able to do that is we had rotated the turret 2 full revolutions. Okay, and this is why the zero stop is so important. We had gone past zero twice on the scope so that the reticle was dialed as high as it possibly could, and then also had to cant the rifle up to essentially splash the bullet, like dump it like a big arc, almost like a cannon would shoot, to get the 22 bullet projectile to go that far. But what's important about that is after you've done something like that, now you're trying to think, oh shit, like where was the actual zero? Because I've just gone past zero several times. I don't even remember how many times I dialed it, right? It's just we were trying to max it out. But with a zero stop, you can just twist it back mindlessly and it will stop at where you had the rifle zeroed at 50 meters or 200 or wherever you may zero your rifle. And so that's a hugely important feature of a great scope. And there's a few reasons why you would want to follow sort of the manufacturer settings for tightening all this shit down and setting things. You know, it can affect your parallax adjustment, turret tracking. Turret tracking is what I was just talking about with those zeros. Reticle subtension accuracy. your MOA adjustment, click accuracy, and light bending angle. This is in regards to over tightening these screws. That's a very common practice is, you know, you get a tough guy or like just a guy who's like going to say, oh, I just half a turn more. We'll make sure that this isn't going to go anywhere, right? Well, your manufacturer setting has torque ratings for these screws. You have to tighten the torque down to the manufacturer settings, not so loose that the barrel harmonics and the whip will cause them to loosen, and not so tight that they'll crush that this tube here, right? If you crush the scope tube, these are some of the issues that you can run into, and all of these things will increase your margin for error when you're shooting, especially at long distances. And the other thing is, by over tightening these screws, you to the naked eye won't notice. Like, you just won't notice these things, but it will affect your shot. So make sure you're following manufacturer settings and recommendations for anything regarding your firearms, right? Like, there's an obvious safety disclaimer here. Like, just follow the damn manufacturer recommendations, especially when you're buying from a great manufacturer like Vortex or Leopold. Okay, so that covers the scope. Next thing I wanted to talk to you about was the stock. Okay, so the stock is sort of the part that is the simplest way to think of it is like your user interface with the rifle. So this is the part that is going to be touching your body, right? This is the part that goes into your shoulder. You're kind of holding it. It's where the action essentially is attached to the rifle. Now, when it comes to your stock, there's a couple different issues. So most, you know, traditional rifles are going to be in a wood or a fiberglass body. And there's a challenge with wood and fiberglass because there needs to be essentially a bedding for the action to connect to that piece of wood. Okay. I would love to have taken apart some of my firearms and show you essentially these various components on the weapons systems that I own, but I have no idea what the hell our laws are in Canada, and I'm increasingly worried about anything like that. And so, you know, I honestly don't understand the rules, so I can't do that for you. But just trust me that your barrel is essentially one part. Then you've got your action. Then you've got a bedding, and then you've got the wood that you actually see and hold. Okay, but that bedding can be made of various different types of materials or adhesives and fasteners. And quite often, when we're talking about wood or we're talking about fiberglass, these different materials that they use can become worn out, right? They can move over time because there's a lot of force, right? Like, when we're shooting firearms, we're talking about, like, you know, hundreds, if not thousands of feet per second out the muzzle. And that creates that explosion back at you. So the other issue is with these stocks. So the bedding's an issue because it can change. It can change, and not all of these materials are made the same. But there's another issue here with the traditional fiberglass and wood stock, and that's a lack of modularity. Okay, so one of the problems is with the traditional hunting rifle is that it just comes in this uniform buttstock with like a uniform grip out the front and no areas to attach anything except maybe a sling onto it. And one of the challenges with that is that it assumes that one size fits all. And I don't know if you've ever, I don't know, had a hat or a sock or something like that. You'll know right away that, like, it's almost never true that one size fits all. Like, that's a lie, right? And so this very same with firearms. So every firearm is going to have different, every shooter is going to have different requirements from their firearm. So we're talking about the cheek rest, we're talking about the buttstock, we're talking about eye relief, we're talking about different accessories and loadouts that are specific to your actual hunt and what you're doing with this firearm. And all of those things change. And one of the problems with a fiberglass stock is, like, unless you're going to start taking up melting resin, right, and working with Kydex or something like that, or fiberglass, and melting it onto the stock and customizing it yourself, you're going to be stuck with a one-size-fits-all rifle that doesn't fit you. Same thing with wood. It's very hard to manipulate wood unless, again, we're working with fiberglass or glue or something on top of it. Again, one of the big issues with that, I would question, is, like, how accurate, how consistent is it going to be if you're just gluing shit onto your gun? I don't think that's a great way to do things. And then one other issue that you may find with a traditional rifle is that you can experience areas of the body and the stock that are actually touching the barrel. And just as I just explained to you guys, when you shoot shoot the gun, there's a barrel whip and there's also barrel harmonics, which are like vibrations that go back and forth from the back to the front of the barrel and affect almost everything on the gun. Well, when the stock is touching your barrel, what that does is it creates inconsistencies in your shot, okay? Because it will cause the barrel to react in a way that is not intended by the original manufacturer. So you don't want to do that if we're talking about reducing margin for error in our shots, which is all we can do. We can only improve our shots. We'll almost never have a perfect shot. I don't believe it's even possible. It's just that we can reduce error, okay? And why not reduce that? So if you are not going to move to what I've considered here to be the solution, I would say that you should at the very least consider using a gunsmith. I have to say that, use a gunsmith to modify your stock so that it is not touching your barrel. It should be free floating so that you can get the most out of your barrel and its harmonics. So my solution for you guys is to move to an all aluminum chassis system. And a chassis is different than a stock because a chassis is a single piece, again, made out of fully out of aluminum, or it should be anyways. The cool thing with aluminum is it's light, it's extraordinarily durable, doesn't rust, right? And you can fix your action right into it as a single piece without having that bedding. So all we're doing here, again, is minimizing the chances for inconsistency or a lack of durability or a lack of longevity. And we've made things lighter and more modular. So here's an image that I'd like to share with you guys. Same gun with that Burris scope, right? Vortex optics, scope rings, and the level. And then we've got this chassis system. So right away, a couple of things to point out with this chassis system compared to a traditional rifle. You got this vertical grip. You can see these screws here are actually, you're able to move this grip forward and back. You've got a ambidextrous magazine release, right? The magazine's not in this firearm right now, but it does take a magazine, which is another great benefit to working with chassis systems, is that you can detach your magazine and replace it very quickly, or render the gun safe very quickly as well. Right here, these are actually they're weights, and it's kind of interesting because when it comes to accuracy, more weight is typically better, okay? Because what we're doing here is we're reducing recoil and helping out all of the different kinetics when it comes to the firearm. So this gun is very light on this chassis until you add all these weights and stuff. And there's also some muzzle accessories that I'll show you on this firearm as well. But these are completely modular. They can come off, and this is what's called an M-lock system. And you can attach, like, it's almost unlimited, the stuff that people have come up with that you can use as an accessory on your firearms using the M-lock system. So flashlights, rangefinders, infrared, different quick detach elements. Like you can see these weights actually do have a QD element to them. So it's like, it's kind of crazy. Like it's almost like if you think about car customizations or something, like there's as many customizations as you can do for something on an M-lock system as you can like a car or whatever other hobby you might have. And all this shit costs money. So these things are a couple $100, I think, for a pair. And there's 3. So you can tell right away we're getting up there for cost, but at the same time, we're talking about accuracy. We're not talking about being frugal when it comes to, precision shooting at long distances. You also notice here, this is a very nice bipod by MDT as well. So MDT LSS XL, great platform, great chassis, and it solves all of those issues described above. We've talked a bit about the barrel and its whip and all that stuff. I'm going to tell you right now, the barrel is where I'm the least informed. And so I went on a little bit of a conquest to do some more research on this, and it wasn't very simple. It seems like there's a definite lack of great information out there as to why the barrel is so important. But when I was researching it, most of what I came up with was related to essentially the level of precision from the manufacturer. So when I was looking at great barrels, I found a great video by Trigger Time TV that I've included here for you guys. It's at the bottom in the resources. And what they're discussing is one single brand. So there will be other brands like this, but they're talking about Bartlein barrels. And I did a little bit of research on them, and it was something like 60% of precision rifle shooters were using Bartlein barrels. So, I mean, that's a pretty high number. And so I was like, well, okay, well, what the hell are they doing that for? And it turns out these guys, one of their biggest arguments is their precision and easy break-in procedures, as well as cleaning later. So the Bartlein barrels are single point cut, okay, to a 30 times smaller than a human hair. Okay, so with these guys, they're using very, 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 very precise equipment to cut these things so that you have less, you essentially want less tolerance between each item. Okay, these guys are taking a very, Six Sigma approach to this type of thing, like very low defects, very low issues. And that's going to be extremely important when we're talking about shooting out to, and again, for hunting, you're probably never going to do this, but if you are doing precision rifle shooting, you might be shooting out to 1,000 meters, 1,500 meters, 2,000 meters, right? Things like that, you're going to need these very, very, very small tolerances built into your firearm. So accuracy and consistency, I would also advise that people get a threaded barrel. A threaded barrel is going to allow you to use things like a muzzle brake, and that's what we've got here. This, I believe, is made by a company called Heathen, which I didn't link, but anyways, it's called Heathen. And you can see here that this one has 3 ports. And so looking at some of the science around this and why you might want to consider a muzzle brake and why it might help you in shooting, these guys did a test. There's a video, I linked it here for you guys. More ports equal less recoil, ? And that's a video actually by MDT Sporting Goods, the same company making that chassis I just recommended to you. And they did a control test where they essentially had a rifle on a hinge, and they had like a level and a measuring device to see how much recoil in terms of how much distance did that rifle come back when they shot it remotely using a remote trigger. Okay, so I thought they did a great job at controlling for any type of influences on the gun. And so each shot was consistent. And what they actually found was that with a rifle, a muzzle brake with as few as 1 port, they were able to reduce the recoil on a shot by 34.9%. That's a single port. And what they found that the optimal number of ports was actually 4 ports, which reduced the recoil by 45%. Okay, so we're talking about nearly half of the recoil coming back to you as a shooter if you're going to use something like a muzzle brake. Okay, these look cool in the movies. Everybody's like, oh, look at that. That's cool. Makes the gun look sick. Why are they using it? Well, it's because you, the gun, your overall accuracy are going to be affected by as much as 50% or 45% if you actually use this item and accessory compared to a bare muzzle. That to me is bloody well compelling. There's not much else you're going to do to your gun that's going to increase anything by 45%. Like that to me is quite absurd. So excellent video here. I suggest you guys watch if you want to see the whole test performed live. And this is what a single port would look like for you guys. The one we just saw was a 3 port, and the optimum one was 4 ports. That brings us down to the trigger. So trigger, and you can see this is a very light subject on this one. Triggers are strange. Triggers are a little bit of a point of personal preference, and some people like a heavier trigger, some people like a lighter trigger. For me, though, I've always found that a much lighter trigger, and for sure in the precision rifle realm, the guys that are doing this professionally, they're using extremely light triggers. So when you go to buy a gun, and you're buying this rifle and it comes out of the box with like a 3, 4, 5, 6, 8 pound trigger, what you have to understand is when you go to pull, and this is already the wrong terminology, but this is what ends up happening when you have a heavy trigger, is you pull that trigger. What you're doing when it's too heavy is you're pulling the rifle with your finger, right? Your finger is going to affect the barrel in a way that is not going to help you. And what we have to remember is that when we're shooting at long distances, small changes at the barrel and at the muzzle can be compounded quite dramatically across distance, right? And I don't know if this is Pythagorean theorem or what the hell, but essentially when you move something over here and you shoot it 1,000 meters over there, it's going to have a big difference, even if we're talking about millimeters. And one of the best ways to reduce that pull is by getting a lighter trigger. So those rifles that you get out of a cheap box, like a Canadian Tire or something like that, they might have a 3, 5, 7 pound trigger. And by pulling on those things, you're probably not eliminating one of the biggest things that's going to be a source of error for you. Trigger pull is extremely important. And so when we're looking at match guys, they're going to be using a 1/2 pound to about 0.9 pounds for their trigger compared to that 6, 7, 8 pounds trigger, right? And like one of the rifles I have here is a Remington 700, and it's set at 3 pounds, which is pretty heavy. But it works, right? It works for 200 to 300 meters. But if you're going to reach outside of there, you really need a trigger that's going to surprise you. Okay, it's got to be consistent. It can't have a lot of this like creep that's creating an issue with your repetitions. And all of this shooting is repetitions. Okay, the more you practice this stuff, the better you will be on each shot. And the way that you should frame it for yourself is successful reps. Okay, how many successful reps are you doing with your firearm? And a big part of that is dry firing. There is a very, very, very big misconception from, I think, just the old guys, and maybe they were correct, because at the time where they were making those firearms, maybe their firing pins were different and made from different materials. But I'm telling you, a modern firearm, you must dry fire it. Okay, you will never become a great shooter if all of your shots are only on the range. How often are you making it to the range? Like for me, it's not that often, right? But you can dry fire at your house. You can dry fire safely, with the gun safe, no ammunition, all that stuff, right? Safety disclaimer, don't do that. But you can dry fire almost all the time, and you should. And part of that is just getting successful reps, right? How are you going to press the trigger? Press the trigger the same way every single time, in the same position every single time. And you want to do this with multiple positions, which I'm going to talk about next. But the other thing that we're not going to really get crazy on here is ballistics. Ballistics is like this whole thing, and probably a 10-hour video would not begin to describe the amount of contention there is in precision rifle shooting about ballistics. Every single person in precision rifle shooting has a different opinion about what's the best ballistic, what load, how many grains, what's the weight of powder behind the bullet, what's the best case for it. Like there's this whole, it's fucking wild how much disagreement there is in that. But what I'm going to say is, if you're not going to be hand loading your own bullets, you should at least be looking to buy from a reputable, high quality manufacturer. And the reason for that is they're going to have a lot less tolerance in the bullets that they put out, and their systems are just simply better. And so you'll get more consistency out of a large batch of shots than you will from, say, that bulk discounted box that your local firearm shop's trying to sell to you. So when you're looking for high quality ammunition, money honestly does talk. Again, this is one of those situations where it probably does. But that being said, all guns are going to be different, right? One gun may really love, say, something from Hornady, where another gun may prefer something from Federal. And there's no right answer here. My solution for you in this article is to go out, try various loads. Okay, you want to try various loadouts, which means like maybe it's 150 grains, maybe 160 grains, and test all that shit out on something that's consistent. Okay, so what you want to do is mount your rifle to a tripod or something like one of these sleds, where essentially you want to eliminate your error, your human error from your shots as you're trying to get a grouping from that specific ammunition. If you're going in and the classic image is of like the old rifleman who's standing up free shooting with his rifle, like, no, don't do that. You need to be either prone with a shooting bag under the butt and your muzzle and your barrel on some stable platform like a bipod or tripod, or put it in a sled where you're not even really touching it. Okay, so eliminate your human error when we're testing these groupings, because that's the only way you're going to find out what's actually happening with the gun and the ammunition versus you adding additional variables in that you can't control for. So you want to eliminate those things that you can control for. And finally, there's the shooter. You can literally have a $50,000 rifle that is got the greatest chassis system of all time, the most expensive scope, the best scope rings ever made, the best trigger ever built, and the greatest barrel, and the best muzzle brake that's ever been tested. And after all of that, you can miss shots, right? You could absolutely screw this up. And what this all comes down to is your training, right? What have you trained for? Have you trained adequately? Have you put the reps in? And that is, it's the same as anything. I mean, like, you can't be a professional basketball player if you don't train like the professionals do, right? You can't be a professional race car driver if you don't train like the race car drivers do. And all of these things are connected to your mental health, right? How are you thinking when you're running through these reps? Are you thinking like you're about to pull the trigger on a living, majestic animal, right? When you're doing these reps, are you thinking about your trigger, your actual trigger pull? Are you thinking about the elevation changes you're likely to experience when you're hunting, right? I'm hunting in mountainous areas where we're climbing up elevation. That means you could be shooting down, you could be shooting up, you could be shooting laterally. I'm shooting at various distances from where I can see, right? There's thick brush in some areas where it's evergreens, and then there's hardwoods, which are wide open. So what do you do when you see that animal? Are you sitting down, right? Are you just about to take a piss? Are you eating? Are you lighting up a cigarette? Are your hands freezing cold? Are you hungover? Are you prepared with your cardiovascular system? Even you've just climbed the hill, you've just crested a hill. Well, there's some animals moving around now, and you're out of breath, you're gassed. Have you trained to calm down your breathing after you've just climbed a hill so that you can break off an accurate shot, right? All of this is important if you're going to be thinking about and all of it's important if you're going to be ethical while you're doing that. And I think that all of that needs to be taken into consideration. Here's a view from sort of the deck at our hunt camp, and here's that rifle in its totality. And one of the things that you weren't able to see in the previous in the discussion about the chassis system is the actual butt of this gun, right? So the butt pad here actually can extend or come back, and that all has to do with kind of the position of how you're going to be holding this and how far back you're going to be. The cheek rest is completely modular here as well to meet your cheek at a natural resting point, so you can get the right eye relief and parallax here on the scope, and just look through it at your natural resting spot. This here is a I forget what it's actually called, but essentially this is going to rest on your shooting bag. So, you know, gone are the days of standing up and shooting a rifle with no support. Like, ideally, you would have something like this bipod or a tripod or shooting sticks under the front of your gun, and then at the back you'd have you could use anything. You could use a sock full of sand. You could use a professional shooting bag. You could use your backpack. You could use a sweater rolled up, right? And what we want to do is have that and squeeze it up so that where we leave the gun is essentially on target with where we were going to shoot, right? So that, like, we're not doing anything except pressing the trigger, ideally. Now, if you're hiking around, you're in the middle of a hunt and you're climbing mountains and shit, this setup is probably not ideal. It's far too heavy, right? You're going to have a different type of system. And again, all these things are modular. Maybe you have less of the weights on. Maybe you don't have this bipod. Maybe it's on a sling, and maybe you're just walking. And in that case, you're going to find a stable shooting position, like perhaps leaning on a tree, right? Grabbing the barrel with your tree, with a tree, and stabilizing the front end that way, and making sure that you practice your fundamentals for pressing the trigger and controlling your breathing on the back end of the gun. So shooting's kind of like golf or pool or whatever else that has no definite end. There is no possible way to find a perfect shot. There is no possible way to shoot the perfect grouping every single time. There's no circumstance in which an animal is going to find you when you're best prepared and then going to break the perfect shot. It just won't happen. And so all of these things that we talked about today are ways that we can minimize our inputs into the errors, right? Like, your equipment's important. And there's probably a whole other video that just focuses on the actual shooter's fundamentals, right? So there's 5 principles of marksmanship, essentially. But the equipment does matter. And the reason why I say this is I actually had my girlfriend, who has had literally zero experience with firearms, shoot this rifle that I was just showing you guys. And she was hitting a gong, which is 12 by 12 at 477 meters with absolutely no training other than 2 minutes of verbal advice as she laid down on the gun. So 477 meters is roughly half a kilometer. For you Americans out there, I don't know what the hell it is in miles, but maybe a quarter mile. And that's an incredibly far distance to be accurate with something that's a couple inches, right, long. And I just have to tell you that the equipment is something that we can solve for, right? Your behavior is something you can train for, but the equipment's something we can solve for. We can have more accuracy by getting a better chassis, by getting a better barrel, by getting better optics, by getting your recoil reduced by a muzzle brake, right? We can do all that stuff. That's very simple to do before we're in the situation where we need to pull the trigger, and we can train on that gun. So I want to share this with you guys because it's something I'm passionate about. I think it's important. I really do believe it's your responsibility as an ethical hunter to be accurate, because there's nothing worse than causing suffering. So that is not the goal of any hunter. And you can control your margins of error by controlling the equipment that you're using and training on it. So yeah, I appreciate you guys for tuning in today. Matt, I don't know if you have any feedback or thoughts on this topic. I know you're not particularly engaged in long distance precision rifle shooting, but happy to hear any feedback.
No, just appreciate you putting this together for us, Adam. And for those of you watching, jump in the comments. Let us know what other sort of hobbies or subject deep dives you'd like to see on future episodes of BDE Media.
Awesome. And we got our first Twitch comment, I noticed while I was talking. So that's cool.
I actually saw that, but didn't realize that it was Twitch.
Yeah. We're going places in the world, Matt. But yeah, guys, there's lots more resources here below my discussion that you can read from. I didn't cover it all. There's a ton of resources you can read from, especially from MDT. I would highly recommend reading through their blog if this is a topic you're interested in. And tomorrow we've got our Halloween special. It's going to be interesting. We're going to be discussing some Halloween experiences, costumes, things like that. And then we're going to do a double. We're going to even do a video preview or viewing party in the evening. So very excited by that, and we'll get you guys tomorrow. And I just saw we have a chat from Al here that just came in. Yes, okay. Al just got his unrestricted and restricted firearms license here in Canada this year, which is both fortunate and unfortunate. Al, I hope you were able to get some restricted firearms before the handgun ban. But if you were not able to do that, that is very, very sad for you. Anyways, guys, we will see you guys tomorrow with a Halloween special. Thank you all for tuning in, and I hope you have the best day ever. Cheers.
They say life is what you make it. So what happens if you actually try? What if you actually tried to get your mind right? What if you actually tried to live the high life? What if you happen to die cause life is finite? What if you actually tried to live your best day ever? What if you actually tried to get your mind right? What if you actually tried to live the high life? What if you happen to die cause life is finite? What if you actually tried to live your best day ever? What if you actually grind out when the time's right? What if you actually blinded by your hindsight? What if you actually find out what defines life? What if you actually tried to live your best day ever? I'm getting 1% better every day. I'm getting 1% better every way. I'm waking up every day to a sunny day. No matter what the weather say, life is like a record, so just let it play.